and welcome to The Point. My name's Birgit Whelan and it's really lovely to be with you as always. Well, the topic on the program this evening is anger. And anger is an emotion that we all experience from time to time, and it varies in intensity, anything from a mild irritation through to frustration and even to angry outbursts and rage. So we're wanting to explore this topic on the program this evening, and in particular look at the causes of anger and the way that anger can affect us in body, soul and spirit. We also want to look at the question of when anger is okay and when it moves into being sinful, and also issues like what happens if we live with an angry spouse or another angry family member, and finally what hope we have in God to overcome this experience or this feeling if it is a problem for us. Joining me to do this is a very special guest and a friend of mine who is the Centre Director of LL Ministries Pierpont, Jill Southern-Jones. Jill, welcome to The Point.
Thank you.
Actually, this is your first time on To The Point. You've been with me for other programs. But
yes, it is. It's good to be here.
It's wonderful. Well, it would be great just to make a start and go straight into the topic. And I wonder if you'd be able to give us a definition of what exactly anger is, and then how anger can affect us, body, soul and spirit.
Anger is obviously an emotion, and it's a God-given emotion. I think that's the most important thing to say.
Yeah.
Anger isn't sin. It says, in your anger, don't sin, in the Bible. God is often angry in many verses. And really anger, the definition of anger really, is it's based in injustice. If we believe we've been treated unjustly by somebody probably in authority, and they've crushed us and pushed us down and so forth, then we can have either an outburst of anger, which is almost like in your face, what you see is what you get, or we can inwardly seethe. And that's probably the worst sort, where we try and repress the anger, because repressed anger can go into depression and other negative things.
Wow. Well, actually, Jill, that's a really interesting answer you've given for a few reasons. One, that you've revealed that actually God himself experiences anger, so we know that anger is not sinful in and of itself. You've also touched on one of the sources of anger, the causes for anger, and then the ways that we can choose to deal with it. So I wonder if I could just pick you up on each of those points. Firstly, it is really interesting to hear that it's a God-given emotion, that it's not wrong in and of itself. And I just wonder if you could set the scene by perhaps sharing some scriptures or parts of the Bible where we see God with this characteristic, or Jesus exhibiting anger.
Yes, both really. God says in Genesis, I'm a jealous God.
Yeah.
I'm jealous over your love and your worship. Yeah. And God doesn't want 99.9% of our love and worship. He wants 100% of it.
Yeah.
So when we go off into worshipping false gods, now obviously that can be a false religion or a goddess or whatever, but also of course it can be anything that displaces God from the highest place. So our new red BMW can be an idol.
Yeah.
Because we stay at home and wash it on Sunday morning maybe instead of going to church or whatever. Right. And it's become inordinately important to us. So idolatry, God says, I'm very angry about. And we can read in the scriptures about the wrath of God. So there's all sorts of scriptures here, but Amos 1:2 says the Lord roars and thunders.
Wow.
So, God can be very angry at disobedience with people in covenant relationship with him. So of course initially it was the Jews in the Old Testament, and then of course the believers on Jesus Christ in the New. If we move on to Jesus, I suppose there's the story that we all remember very well with Jesus with anger was when he goes into the temple and he sees the money changers.
Yes.
And he says, you've made my Father's house into a den of thieves. Now, if we just look carefully, unpack what Jesus did there, he made a whip of cords, and he throws over the money tables, and all the money presumably goes rolling down on the floor, and the people take off because they could probably see he was pretty hopping. Now, interestingly, I mean, what was he angry about? You had to give an offering, a dove or whatever it was, and you had to pay for it in temple money. And what was really going on here is that they were cheating the people from their ordinary coinage. They were elevating the rate of exchange, so they were cheating the people because they had to have the temple money to go and buy their offering, and this upset Jesus very much. But in his anger, he didn't hit anybody.
No.
And the tables were turned over. Well, they're inanimate objects, and the people ran, but he didn't hit anybody with the whip. So he expressed his anger in a very strong way, actually, but actually didn't hurt anyone.
Jill, that is just so helpful to set the scene in terms of seeing it both in God's character, but also in the way that Jesus exhibited anger at this injustice and the form of his expression. And we're just going to a very brief music break at this point. When we come back, I'm going to pick you up on the causes of anger and how that affects us in different ways, both physically and spiritually. We're going to a Darlene Check music break. We'll be back with you in a few moments. Hi, and welcome back to The Point. We're discussing the topic of anger on the program today. And in the introduction, we heard from Jill all about anger in terms of God's expression of anger in the Old Testament and also through the life of Christ. So Jill, at this point it would be really helpful to pick you up on a point that you were making at the beginning as well, which are the various causes of anger. You made the really helpful point about injustice being one, and how injustice, when something is done that we consider to be unfair, unreasonable, unwelcome, that can actually cause us to experience anger to different degrees. So what are some of the other reasons that might lead to anger? Yes, I think we don't realise that if we've had injustice in our childhood, so supposing someone has been beaten unfairly by a parent that wasn't so much about what they'd done wrong, wasn't really a punishment so much as the parent venting their spleen on something else that had happened to the parent, or whoever it was that was doing the beating. When the child grows up, goes to work or goes to church, you could say, don't like your hair, and they'll completely explode. And you'll think, what on earth did I say? Well, probably not very much.
But 80% of the anger explosions today are not based in anything today.
Wow.
They're based in that which happened back there. And only probably the trigger, or priming the pump as we might call it, the trigger happened today. The remark that you made was just the last straw. And the person erupts.
That's such an interesting and helpful point, because it actually makes you think about all sorts of situations where people really show this explosive anger. We have road rage, for example. You can just be talking with someone and get that kind of reaction, as you're saying, but also in a family context as well, when we're dealing with a spouse who may have a problem with anger, and we can just say something and it triggers this seemingly disproportionate response. So what you've just said is quite helpful to try and understand that. And later in the program, we're going to be speaking about family relationships where there is anger. But just to carry on with the point that you're making about these different root causes of anger in people's lives.
Yes, I mean, if it usually is where we have been wrongly punished. Have you ever been punished for something you never did?
Yeah, it's it. Yeah.
And you're falsely accused. False accusation. You did it.
Yes.
But you know in your heart you didn't do it. But you're now going to be publicly, humiliated for doing it. You're going to be punished for doing it. And of course, this makes us, we may not be able to do anything about it because the person's in authority at school or a parent or whatever.
Yeah.
But actually, we seethe on the inside and we stuff it down.
Yeah. And also, I mean, perhaps the person who was the perpetrator of what caused us to feel the anger has passed away, and it's another situation where we're not really able to go to the person and express the hurt from the past or whatever's happened.
No, that's right. And and of course it compounds.
Yes.
And so we can get to a place where we can feel a bit of a victim. Everybody that comes close to me has authority over me, wrongly uses or abuses that authority, and I get wrongly or harshly treated. And so the person can have a build-up of maybe they've been overlooked for promotion, and somebody who was, in their view, completely inappropriate was promoted over their heads, and it was something they were looking forward to and really needed the finance from that or whatever.
Yeah. So
it's this frustration. Of course, it can be betrayal. Someone, what is betrayal? You sacrificed my trust for personal gain.
Right.
And when people in relationship with us sacrifice our trust for their own personal gain somehow out of it, then of course that can make us feel terribly angry.
Yeah.
So all these things that cause anger, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to handle it.
Well, that's an interesting point, because you've talked about how anger can move from being just a day-to-day response to something far deeper, where it becomes a way of responding to other issues that come up. It's at a deeper level, almost like a stronghold. So I wonder if I could ask you about the ways that would be helpful to respond to anger and the ways that would be unhelpful, leading to this deeper issue of anger, the stronghold of anger. So what's a right response, and what's what would lead to a stronghold?
Yes, as a child, we never understand why we're angry.
Yeah.
We just feel frustrated on the inside, and we'll lash out, or we'll trash something, or we'll behave badly in some major way, which of course causes more problems for us usually. As we grow up, we still probably don't recognise that the anger is based in how we were dealt with in the past.
Right.
So the way we should express anger is it needs to be released, and it probably needs to be physically released. So if we feel this, this anger building up inside us, it's very good to go and dig the garden or get the vacuum cleaner out and really go vigorously at the lounge carpet or whatever. It probably needs to come out physically. In our anger courses, we use cushions and bash trees with the cushions, or we tread on bubble wrap or whatever, because we need to really express that anger.
Yeah.
Repressing anger makes a second problem.
Right.
So it needs somehow to be released. I mean, Jesus released his anger by throwing over these tables. I mean, that was a physical act.
Yeah.
And chasing them halfway down the road or whatever he did, he physically released it. He didn't stuff it or try and repress it or pretend it wasn't there.
Yeah.
Unreality doesn't help us. I am not angry, says this person to you, oh my word, who's absolutely spitting, and the person denies the fact that they're angry at all. I'm sure the road rage, a person who's really into road rage, it isn't today. That's him boiling over today, isn't it?
Exactly.
He'd be sure if we sat down with them and had a quiet conversation, if that was possible, we'd be looking at what happened to him in his childhood.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. It's this idea of short temper, but actually, why is a person having difficulty with short temper? Why do they flare up so quickly? And it's, as you're saying, often that there is this build-up which hasn't been properly expressed in the past. And so that's helpful that you've talked about some kind of immediate physical expression of the anger. Are there other practical steps that people can take to express anger? I'm thinking along the lines of perhaps talking with someone, journaling, and also the role of prayer in terms of expressing anger.
Yes, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that I have a problem with anger. I mean, that's got to be chapter 1, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I actually do have a problem with anger. Now, you see, the issue is it's probably not the person's faults. It's the sins of others against us that causes us to have this anger.
Yeah.
So if on a rational day they could sit down with a prayer counsellor, prayer person, and just talk through, we could say, well, let's just have a quiet talk together. What is it that makes you angry? Yeah. What is the worst thing that you've done when you're angry? Because of course anger spills over into violence.
Yes.
We can watch an angry explosion. The anger comes up. Maybe somebody triggers it, makes matters worse.
Yeah. And
the person explodes. Now, the first thing people do is swear. Yes. Shout, swear, and then reach for something. And of course, they're not in control now. Yeah. So they lose control, a normal restraint that's godly self-control if they're a Christian.
Yes.
But of course they can reach for something to throw, but it could be a knife, or people have thrown a whole pile of plates or something like this. Yeah. If you want to break up your dinner service and throw it on the yard outside, well, there's something you can do. But it's where we should be expressing it without hurting another person. Yeah. But of course, people who live with angry people are worried that they're going to get beaten up, basically, when the person loses it.
Well, it would be interesting to talk about that, because I'm sure there are people who are watching who do experience what it's like to live with an angry loved one, whether it's their own spouse, whether it's a parent or even a child. I mean, there are many situations where we can be confronted with this in a relationship. And as you say, it can be quite scary when somebody loses that kind of control and exhibits that kind of violent rage, really. And it may not be that a person is being physically abused, but there is certainly a fear that comes with being around that level of angry outburst or rage. So if there is somebody watching who is dealing with that and dealing with it on an ongoing basis, how would you respond to that?
Yes, I think recognise the stages of an angry outburst. If the person is in a really bad mood and is irritable, that's probably stage 1, and it's a good thing to walk away. Right. Find something else to do. Yeah. Because this isn't the moment to be saying, actually, I think you're angry, because that very statement could send them into orbit. Yes. So this isn't the moment to deal with it, but to look after oneself. So the annoyance and whatever, well, actually, I need to go to the local shop to buy a loaf or whatever. Remove yourself, if possible, from before it gets to the next stage. Yeah. The next stage would be shouting. Yes. Person shouts and has an angry argument. Now, never argue with an angry person, because there's absolutely no point. You're not going to win the argument, and it's just going to send them up to the next level. Yes. So it's not a moment to argue. So if the person is then shouting and swearing and whatever, certainly remove yourself now, because the next stage to that is that the person will boil over, and that could mean that our person gets smacked or hit or damaged in some way, so we get physical violence, emotional violence. I wish I'd never married you. You know, and or to a child, usually to the child, we didn't ever want you, we didn't plan you, you're a mistake, and you shouldn't even be here. You know, these things that people can say in anger go deeply into the heart and the emotions of the victim, of the angry person, and they'll remember it forever. You know, and it's the anger in the eyes and the way in which these hurtful statements are made, which maybe the person doesn't even mean. But it's no good next day the person saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't intend to hurt you, and say that. It's like a fiery dart of the wicked has penetrated all our defences, and it's really devastated us, you know.
It's really interesting just to hear that process of escalation, and also to look at this sort of connection between how anger comes from injustice in the life of the person, but actually how that anger can then really impact and hurt other people in the way that you're saying. It's interesting to hear that, and also it makes me think it would be great to do another program at a later time on abuse in that kind of way, the different forms that abuse can take. I'm just mindful that we have a few minutes left. I just wanted to round off that point though by saying that if somebody is watching and they are dealing with this on an ongoing basis, is there some advice that you can give just in the meantime of what they could do if they're dealing with this and they don't know what to do? Is there a step they could take?
Yes, let's look at the two classes of people. First of all, the angry person.
Yes.
The world would talk about anger management. Jesus didn't die for us to, on the cross, for us to manage anything, you know. Jesus died to set us free. If the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. So the good news for the angry person is this is not your fault. And Jesus wants to set you free. So the way to being set free really is to go to a Christian counsellor. I mean, we have people a lot in LL, of course, over anger, and find your route through to God to get the absolute root of that anger dealt with. The pain may involve forgiving the person that's beaten you, or whatever the root was. For the person that is a victim to the angry person, this is where we get battered wives. This is where we get people having black eyes that they have to excuse, you know, so I've bumped into a door or whatever. And the person next morning can say, did I do that black eye? I can't remember doing it at all. Because they've lost complete control. And this will be repetitive until we get that root out. The person can just always, I mean, the anger is a fruit of another root, and we need to deal with the root so that the person is free. But then the victims don't have to put up with it. You know, a wife does not have to be beaten up. God doesn't call us to submit to the ungodly anger. And of course you can get a spirit of anger which goes down the whole family. You know, and if we lived in an angry environment or raised by angry parents, then of course that's modelled to us. That can easily be how our modus operandi if we don't deal with it.
Jill, this is all so helpful, and just in the remaining minutes there are just a couple of things I wanted to pick up on. The first is what you mentioned about forgiveness, and actually how key forgiveness can be to being released from this experience of anger. Could you just comment on that?
Yes. I mean, only when we understand the forgiveness of God for us, and God can give us, if you like, in our empty forgiveness tank, a spirit of forgiveness from God that we can then release to the person that's most hurt us. And that is such a big key in freedom.
It's huge. And also, I'm just interested in this connection between a stronghold of anger and depression. And when you see somebody who withdraws and can be almost sulky in a way, these are other expressions of anger that hasn't been dealt with. Is that true?
Yes. It starts with unreality. I don't have a problem with anger. Where clearly everybody around them knows they have a big problem with anger. And then if I don't believe it, I've got the problem, then I don't deal with it. So of course it doesn't help me, because I then repress it, try and pretend I haven't got the problem. And then it can come out with physical sicknesses. It can come out with, of course, major emotional depressions. I think a lot of people who are continuously on antidepressants need to ask the question, do I really have a buried anger problem? You know, I could have buried it so far down, I don't recognise it anymore as anger. So it's so important that we get into reality, get the appropriate level of help, which of course has got to be Bible-based help, because only Jesus really can deal with the core issues of why we like that, and to start to ask God to transform our lives and to change us.
And just in the closing minute or so, I wonder if you can just give us hope about the hope that we do have in Jesus. I mean, in your experience, have you seen many people set free by the power of God?
Huge number of people set free. When people start to walk in reality, Lord, I've got a problem and I need your help. I cannot fix it myself. Don't think that by going to anger management classes or whatever, that's not going to fix it. Only Jesus can show us, reveal to us the route and get that route out.
Jill, it has been so helpful hearing your advice and comments on this whole topic of anger. Thank you so much for being part of the program. We hope the program has been a blessing to you this evening. I look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, God bless you. Bye-bye.